A new and exciting note sounded loud and clear with Jerome Kern's arrival on the American popular music scene, and it was to continue to do so for many years to come. Until that time, the influence had been predominantly European, but Kern was to change all that by giving his music a distinct American sound. His songs are still whistled and hummed today, over 30 years since his death. He was a perfectionist, a master craftsman, whose melodies will always remain fluid, graceful, and lovely to listen to.
Here we all work on the Mississippi, here we all work on the white folks' land, loading up boats with the bales of cotton, getting no rest till the judgment day. Roll that day, let's have fun, there's another way on the levee for you. Work all day and get no fun, we know something better for a fellow too. Here we all work on the Mississippi, here we all work on the white folks' land, loading up boats with the bales of cotton, getting no rest till the judgment day. Cotton bustle, not will sail, flowing free. When they back you on my levee, you're a heavy load to me. Cotton bustle, not will sail, rolling wide. On my levee, you're too heavy for them wearing ties. What a pretty baby, are there, the fairest of the land, the southern beauty, every flow must. Are you not the ladder? You roll, oh goodness gracious, they're so audacious, you foolish fellow, you see the
Jerome David Kern was the youngest of 9 boys and came into the world in New York City on January the 27th, 1885. While his brothers showed little, if any, interest in music, Jerome was the opposite. At 5, he began studying the piano with his mother, who proved to be a severe taskmaster, hovering over him as he played, smiling in appreciation when he did well, but always ready to reprimand stray notes, or Jerome's habit of adding parts of his own to the score he was studying. At the age of 10, he saw his first musical show. When he came home, Jerome played all the tunes he'd heard that night by ear. That same year, it was 1895, the Kerns moved to Newark, New Jersey, and at his new school, he was always called upon to play the piano for school productions, while in the evening he took classes at the New York College of Music in theory and orchestration. When he was about 13, Jerome told his parents, "I'm going to be a composer." Mrs. Kern was delighted, but his father was not so sure. He had other plans for young Jerry, and when the boy was 16, he broke the news to his son that he was to join the family business. There's a story that one of his first jobs was to go and buy some Italian pianos. Mr. Kern reasoned that since Jerome loved music so much, it'd be a good way of breaking him into the selling business. He sent Jerry off to the importers, where he was treated to much Italian food and wine before the deal was clinched. And apparently Jerry was overwhelmed by the fine Chianti, and when the time came to order the pianos, he said he'd take 2. 200, said the salesman. Bravo! The following morning, as piano followed piano into the family business, his father said, "Son, I think I'm going into the piano business, and as for you, I think you should become a musician." Jerry continued his studies at music college, but it became obvious that he was not going to be an American Tchaikovsky. Instead, he began to realize that it was the music being played in the theater that interested him most. In 1902, he was 17, and for the first time, one of the many songs he'd sent off to the various music publishers was accepted. A piano piece he'd written called "At the Casino" was published. The fact that Jerome was a published composer gave Mr. Kern more confidence in Jerome's ability, and he decided to send him to Europe, the place where it was all happening in 1903. Jerome stayed in Berlin for a while, attending the theatre and soaking up the excitement of the place, and then took root in London, where he went to performance after performance at Daly's and the Gaiety Theatre. This was essentially a time when Jerry was sharpening his musical wits, moving between London and New York, and getting some work in shows. Admittedly, it was in an assistant's role, but he was learning all the time. It was during this period that Kern had his first American success with a song called "How'd You Like to Spoon With Me?" He'd written the song with lyricist Edward Lasker for a Broadway show called "The Earl and the Girl," which opened in 1905. It was also to be interpolated much later into a London revival of Showboat.
I always was demure.
I never knew what silly lovers do. No flirting I'd endure.
In all my life I've never kissed a man.
I've never winked my eye. But now at last I'm going to break the ice. So how'd you like to try? How'd you like to spoon with me? How'd you like to spoon with me? Sit beneath that oak tree, large and shady, calling me a tootsie, whootsie, baby. How'd you like to hug and squeeze? Dangle me upon your knees. How'd you like to be my lovey-dovey? How'd you like to spoon with? How'd you like to spoon with? How'd you like to spoon with me? How'd you like to spoon with? How'd you like to spoon with me?
The demand for Kern's services grew, and between 1905 and 1912, he wrote almost 100 songs, which found their way into about 30 Broadway shows, a good apprenticeship for a young composer. He continued to visit London, a place that was like a second home to him, and it was here that he met Miss Eva Leal, a quiet English girl who was to become his wife in October 1910. Another important event for Kern came in 1912, when for the first time he provided the entire score for a play, The Red Petticoat, which was a moderate success. This was followed by two other musicals in 1913, But as far as the theatre-going public was concerned, The Girl from Utah was the show to see in 1914. Kern had written a number of additional songs for its American run, and one of them was They Didn't Believe Me. It became his first classic, selling over 2 million copies of sheet music, and is still being recorded today.
Got the cutest little way, like to watch you all the day, and it certainly seems fine just to think that you'll be mine. When I see your pretty smile, makes the living worth the while. So I've got to run around telling people what I found. And when I told them how beautiful you are, they didn't believe me. They didn't believe me. Your lips, your eyes, your cheeks, your hair are in a class beyond compare. You're the loveliest girl that one could see. And when I tell them, and I'm certainly going to tell them, that I'm the man whose wife one day you'll be, they'll never believe me. They'll never believe me that from this great big world you've chosen me. Your eyes, your cheeks, your hair are in a class beyond compare. You're the loveliest girl that one could see. And when I tell them, and I'm certainly going to tell them, that I'm the man whose wife one day you'll be, they'll never believe me. They'll never believe me that from this great big world you've chosen.
If Kern opened a new door in popular music with They Didn't Believe Me, he was soon to do a similar service for musical comedy. Beginning in 1915, he worked on a series of shows performed in a much smaller venue than was usual for that time. They've become known as the Princess shows, after the place they were held, the Princess Theatre. Economic, with an intimate feel to them, these shows helped strike for the American theatre a new path by containing songs that fitted the plot and mood of the storyline. The first was Nobody Home, which was successful enough to convince the producers to put on another, teaming Kern and his lyricist for Nobody Home, Guy Bolton. This time they came up with Very Good Eddie, a major box office success which played for over a year. Years later, Richard Rodgers was to say that as a boy of 14, he went to see the show and became convinced that his future lay in writing show music himself. The next big Princess Theatre success was Oh Boy, which included the writing talents of P.G. Wodehouse, whom Kern had met on one of his earliest trips to London. His skill at versification and his charming turns of phrase blended themselves beautifully with Kern's melody lines. The song from Oh Boy was this one, and it was used years later in the motion picture story of Kern's life. Oh Boy proved a goldmine at the box office, and so did its successor, Oh Lady, Lady. In between these two, the trio worked on a very big show called Miss 1917, and another that played at the Longacre Theatre and won critical acclaim called Leave It to Jane. It was during this time, though, that certain rifts between the partnership of Wodehouse, Bolton and Kern began to develop over money and the various directions each wished to take. But all in all, 1917 was a very good year for Jerome Kern.
Leave it to Jane, Jane, Jane.
I don't know why you should make me plot and plan for you.
She is the girl with...
I always try to do everything I can for you.
No problem you can wish on her gives her a strain.
She'll tackle gaily a score or more daily.
If something is on your mind,
And I can see that there is not a doubt of it.
comfort you soon will find.
Leave it to me, I will soon get you out of it.
If you have started worrying, kindly refrain and just hand over the whole thing to Jane.
Well, Jane, why don't you tell us how you do it?
Yeah, come on, Jane, tell us.
Oh, but it's really very simple. I just study up on the famous women of history.
You mean like Lucretia Borgia?
Well, no, not exactly. Listen. In days of old, beside the Nile, a famous queen there dwelt. Her clothes were few, but full of style, her figure slim and svelte. On every man that wandered by, she pulled the theta barai. And everyone observed with awe that her work was swift, but never raw. I'd be like Cleopatra if I could have my way. Each man she met that she wed and kissed, and she dozens on her waiting list. I wish that I had lived there beside the pyramid, for a girl today don't get the scope that Cleopatra did. That dancing Cleopatra was always on the spot. She gave those poor Egyptian ginks something else to watch beside the Sphinx. Mark Antony admitted that what first made him skid was the wibbly wobbly wibbly dance that Cleopatra did.
On your mind, comfort you soon will find. If you have started worrying, kindly refrain. Don't you bother, don't go to your father. Just leave it to Jane, 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 Jane. Turn the whole thing over to
By now, Jerry was a very rich young man, frequently earning up to $5,000 a week in royalties. He and Eva moved away from the noise and grime of the city into a new home about 2 hours' drive from the center of New York, a house that was more suited to the status of a man who considered himself the greatest living popular composer. After 8 years of marriage, a daughter, Elizabeth Jane, was born, and Jerry was determined that she would always have the best money could buy. P.G. Wodehouse made his way back to Europe and began to develop Jeeves, a character in his novels who would remain popular for decades. Jerry continued his prodigious output, writing not only for the American stage, but also the West End. In 1920, he had his biggest success to date. Teamed again with Guy Bolton by the famous producer Florence Ziegfeld, and with the assistance of Victor Herbert and 3 other lyric writers, Kern produced the music for Sally, a stunning theatrical experience that remained on Broadway for a total of 16 months. The show enchanted audiences in London also, and the most popular song on both sides of the Atlantic that year was Look for the Silver Lining.
Please don't be offended if I preach to you a while. Tears are out of place in eyes that were meant to smile. There's a way to make your very biggest trouble smile. Here's the happy secret of it all. Look for the silver lining whenever clouds appear in the blue. Remember somewhere the sun is shining, and so the right thing to do is make it shine for you. A heart full of joy and gladness will always banish sadness and strife. So always look for the silver lining and try to find
writing songs for the theatre was his all-consuming obsession, Jerry also had time for a few hobbies, which he pursued with as much vigour as he did a catchy melody. When he first saw a signature of Wagner for sale at an auction, he decided he must have the autographs of all the great composers, a target he eventually reached. He was also interested in old and rare books, and bought them wherever he went, in the second-hand shops of Fifth Avenue and 42nd Street, and in London's Charing Cross Road. He accumulated a library with few rivals in private hands, including first editions of Shelley and Tennyson, and original manuscripts by Swinburne and Samuel Johnson. He loved a game of poker, and made bets on horses through a bookmaker, whom he helped to support through his consistent losses. After his hit with Sally in 1920, Jerry wrote the scores for 9 musicals. The most successful were Stepping Stones and a show called Sunny, which opened in 1925 and contained a song that far outdistanced the show. Simply called Who, it had lyrics by Oscar Hammerstein II and has become a Kern classic.
In love with someone he must be indeed a dumb one if her secret he cannot unbar. When a girl's in love with someone she must wait until there comes one boy who knows the answer when they're on. Ooh, so my heart away. Ooh, makes me dream all day. Dreams I know can never come true. Seems as though I'll ever be blue. It's my happiness. Ooh, would I answer yes? Ooh,
Well, you ought to guess who.
I can't tell you.
When a man's in love with someone, he has got to overcome one obstacle that's always in the way. Finding words to pop the question gives him mental indigestion. Possibly you'll get me when I say, ooh, stole my heart away. Ooh, makes me dream all day. Dreams I know can never come true. Seems as though I'd ever be blue.
It's my happiness. Ooh, could I answer yes? Ooh,
Well, you ought to guess who. No one but you. Stole my heart away. Makes me dream all day. Dreams I know can never come true. Seems as though I'd ever be blue. Need for happiness. Would I answer yes to? Well, you ought to guess who. No one but you.
Penny Hale and Jack Buchanan from the original London cast of Sunny. By 1927, Kern was at the zenith of his inspiration. After reading Edna Ferber's novel Showboat, a colourful chronicle about the riverboats that sailed up and down the Mississippi, bringing entertainment to the towns along the way, he knew that it could be fashioned into a new type of musical, one concerned with the plot line, the background, and the atmosphere of the characters involved. Such a concept was revolutionary for the 1920s. Old ideas had to be scrapped because the story made no allowances for contrived routines and production numbers. Once she recovered from the shock, Edna Ferber gave her consent to her novel being made into a musical, and Jerry, along with Oscar Hammerstein II, set to work on the project. The writing of Showboat was a source of joy and exhilaration for both Kern and Hammerstein. They immersed themselves in it completely, talking for hours about how the characters should be developed or how specific songs should grow from the action. They had no idea that what they were producing would become an historic document. Anyone eavesdropping on the pair as they worked might have been forgiven for thinking that Showboat came about with almost casual ease. But after the inspiration came the hard work. There were many hitches, but the show finally opened in New York on December the 27th, 1927, and was an instant success.
Till I die, can't help loving that man of mine. Tell me he's easy, tell me he's slow, tell me I'm crazy or maybe I know. Can't help loving that man of mine. Oh, listen, sister, I love my Mr. Man, and I can't tell you why. There ain't no reason why I should love that man. It must be something that the angel done planned. Fish gotta swim and birds gotta fly. I gotta love one man till I die. Can't help loving the man of mine. Tell me he's lazy, tell me he's slow, tell me I'm crazy or maybe I know. Can't help loving the man of mine. When he goes away, that's a rainy day. But when he comes back, that day is fine. The sun will shine. He can come home as late as can be. Home without him ain't no home to me. Can't help loving that man of mine. My man is shiftless and good for nothing too. He's my man just the same. He's never wronged me when there is work to do. He's never wronged me when there's working to do. The chimney's smoking, the roof is leaking in, but he don't seem to care. He can be happy with just a sip of gin. I even loved him when his kisses got gin. He's got a
His biographer, David Ewan, once said of Kern, he was never in better form than when he wrote his music for Showboat. Rising to new heights as a composer, he lifted Hammerstein with him. Hammerstein's text had dramatic truth and power. His lyrics possessed grace and suppleness, and with more than one touch of eloquent poetry. His text and lyrics were as important in opening new areas for the American musical stage as was Kern's incomparable score. Showboat produced an enduring classic that's often been mistaken for a real Negro spiritual. The majesty of Old Man River is timeless, And like the river it describes, it just keeps rolling along.
Mississippi, that's the old man that I'd like to be. What does he care if the world's got troubles? What does he care if the land ain't free? Old Man River, that old man River, he must know something, but don't say nothing. He just keeps rolling, he keeps on rolling along. He don't plant taters, he don't plant cotton, and damn that planter is soon forgotten. But old man River, he just keeps rolling along. You and me, we sweat and strain, body all aching and wrecked with pain. Tote that barge, lift that bale, get a little drunk, and you land in jail. I get weary and sick of trying. I'm tired of living and scared of dying. But old man River, he just keeps rolling along. Let me go away from the Mississippi, let me go away from the white man boss. Show me that stream called the River Jordan, that's the old stream that I longs to cross. Old man River, that old man River, he must know something, but don't say nothing. He just keeps rolling, he keeps on rolling. Long river forever keeps rolling on. He don't plant cotton, and then that planter is soon forgotten. But old man River, he just keeps rolling. Long river keeps hearing that song. You and me, we sweat and strain, body all aching and racked with pain. Tote that barge and lift that bale, we gets a little drunk and we lands in jail. I get weary and sick of crying. I'm tired of living and scared of dying. But old man River, he just keeps rolling on.
Paul Robeson, who played Joe in the original Drury Lane production of Showboat. The musical ran on Broadway for almost 2 years, playing to capacity houses with a weekly gross of $50,000. It's been filmed 3 times. One might speculate on what one does after such a phenomenal success. But for Jerry, the choice was easy. He just kept on working. Composing, he once said, is like fishing. You get a nibble, but you don't know whether it's a minnow or a marlin until you reel it in. You write 20 tunes to get 2 good ones. After Showboat, Kern teamed again with Guy Bolton and wrote a show called Blue Eyes for the London stage. He also decided to sell his by now immense and valuable collection of old and rare books. They went under the auctioneer's hammer and fetched the unprecedented amount of $1.7 million. Jerry invested nearly all of it in bank stocks. Little did he know that the Wall Street crash and the resulting depression were only 9 months away. When it hit, the money from the books vanished. And if it had not been for the silver he'd been collecting almost as assiduously as he had the books, he would have been ruined. But Jerry had another asset that he could rely on, and that was his talent. He teamed with Otto Harbach, and they came up with 2 box office successes in a row, The Cat and the Fiddle in 1931 and Roberta in 1933. The shows produced such memorable songs as She Didn't Say Yes and Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, a song that went on to become one of Kern's sturdiest moneymakers.
They asked me how I knew my true love was true. Replied, something here inside cannot be denied. They said someday you'll find all who love are blind. When your heart's on fire, you must realize smoke gets in your eyes. So I charged them and I gaily laughed to think they could doubt my love. Yet today my love has flown away. Friends deride, tears I cannot hide. I smile and say, when your lovely flame dies, smoke gets in.
Roberta, which gave us Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, and incidentally starred a very young Bob Hope, was to be the last big success Jerry had on Broadway. By this time, the Hollywood movie machine was well established, and it held an irresistible fascination for Kern. His association with the silver screen began with adaptations of his big musicals, Showboat and Sally in 1929, Sunny in 1930, The Cat and the Fiddle in 1933, and Music in the Air in 1934. It wasn't long before he realized this was the medium of the future. His first original score for the screen was I Dream Too Much, for which the lyricist was Dorothy Fields, a lady with whom he was to produce many delightful and memorable tunes. Another important factor in his movie career was the singing and dancing team of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, who performed the Kern-Fields numbers with their own particular style and grace.
I won't dance, don't ask me. I won't dance, don't ask me. I won't dance, madam, with you. My heart won't let my feet do things they should do. Say, you know what? You're lovely. You know what? You're lovely. But oh, what you do to me. I'm like an ocean wave that's bumped on the shore. I feel so absolutely stumped on the floor.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. Try it again. Beginning. All right. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2.
I'm getting it.
Yes.
Someday, when I'm awfully low and the world is cold, I will feel a glow just thinking of you and the way you look tonight. Oh, but you're lovely, with your smile so warm and your cheeks so soft. There is nothing for me but to love you, just the way you look tonight. With each word your tenderness grows, tearing my fear apart. And that laugh that wrinkles your nose touches my foolish heart. Lovely, never, never change. Keep that breathless charm. Won't you please arrange it, 'cause I love you, just the way you look tonight. Just the way you look tonight.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Turn. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now you've got it. I can't teach you anything.
Lovely to look at, delightful to know, and heaven to kiss. A combination like this is quite my most impossible scheme come true. Imagine finding a dream like you. You're lovely to look at, it's thrilling to hold you terribly tight. For we're together, the moon is new, and oh, it's lovely to look at you tonight.
A fine romance with no kisses. A fine romance, my friend. This is, we should be like a couple of hot tomatoes. But you're as cold as yesterday's mashed potatoes. A fine romance you won't nestle. A fine romance you won't wrestle. I've never mussed the crease in your blue serge pants. I never had the chance. This is a fine romance. A fine romance, my good fellow. You take romance, I'll take jello. You're calmer than the seals in the Arctic Ocean. At least they flap their fins to express emotion. A fine romance with no quarrels, with no insults, and all the morals. You're just as hard to land as the Ile de France. I never get the chance. This is a fine romance.
Please, teacher, teach me something. Nice teacher, teach me something. I'm as awkward as a camel. That's not the worst. My 2 feet haven't met yet, but I'll be the teacher's pet yet, 'cause I'm going to learn to dance Harburg.
Nothing's impossible, I have found. For when my chin is on the ground, I pick myself up, dust myself off, start all over again. Don't lose your confidence if you slip. Be grateful for a pleasant trip and pick yourself up, dust yourself off, start all over again. Work like a soul inspired till the battle of the day is won. You may be sick and tired, but you'll be a man, my son. Will you remember the famous men who had to fall to rise again? So take a deep breath, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, start all over again.
I'll get some self-assurance if your endurance is great. I'll learn by easy stages if you're courageous and wait. To feel the strength I want to, I must hang on to your hand. Maybe by the time I'm 50, I'll get up and do a nifty.
All right, I'll show you again. Now remember, 3 steps to the left, 3 steps to the right.
That's the right.
And turn. Right. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
I know, I'm fine. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, start all over again.
And so Fred and Ginger danced and sang their way through the screen musicals of Jerome Kern. The Way You Look Tonight from Springtime in 1936 won Kern his first Oscar for a song. His decision to move from New York to Hollywood had proved to be a wise one, as the public had a seemingly insatiable appetite for film musicals. Jerry was again to have the honor of receiving an Oscar for one of his songs, but this time it was to be most unexpected and for an unusual Kern composition. His old partner, Oscar Hammerstein, wrote a lyric about the way he felt when he heard of the occupation of Paris by Nazi Germany in 1940. Naturally, he wanted some music to go with it and asked Jerry if he could come up with something. The result was The Last Time I Saw Paris, and it holds a singular place among Kern's songs for a number of reasons. It was the only song owing its writing to an historical event rather than a contractual commitment. It's the only song in which the lyric was written before the melody, and it's the only song written with no production, stage or screen, in mind. In 1941, the song was incorporated in the musical motion picture version of a Gershwin musical called Lady Be Good. The only Kern tune in an otherwise all Gershwin score, it went on to win an Academy Award. A version of it popular during the war years was by this man, Noel Coward.
Paris, romantic and charming, left all her old companions and faded from view. Lonely men with lonely eyes are seeking her in vain. Her streets are where they were, but there's no sign of her. She has left the same. The last time I saw Paris, her heart was warm and gay. I heard the laughter of her heart in every street cafe. The last time I saw Paris, her trees were dressed for spring, and lovers walked beneath those trees, and birds found songs to sing. I dodged the same old taxicabs that I had dodged for years. The chorus of their squeaky horns was music to my ears. The last time I saw Paris, her heart was young and gay. No matter how they change her, I'll remember her that way. Think of happy hours and people who share them, old women selling flowers in markets at dawn, children who applauded Punch and Judy in the park, and those who danced at night and kept their Paris bright till the town went dark. The last time I saw Paris, her heart was warm and gay. I heard
Jerry continued to work in Hollywood, and even approaching the age of 60, he could churn out a good melody. He still had a good dose of Broadway in his blood, however, and planned to produce a revival of Showboat and write a new musical for the stage based on the character of Annie Oakley, which was to be produced by Rodgers and Hammerstein. The tragedy was that he never lived to see Showboat revived, nor did he write a single note of his new Broadway score. On a visit to New York in November 1945, he collapsed, the victim of a cerebral hemorrhage from which he never recovered. He died 6 days later with only Oscar Hammerstein at his side. An obituary in the New York Herald Tribune summed up his life with these words: "Genius is surely not too extravagant a word for him. He left us rare treasures."
Of every dream I ever knew, down deep in my heart, I hear it play, I feel it start, then melt away. I hear music when I touch your hand, a beautiful melody from some enchanted land. Down deep in my heart, I hear it sing. Is this the
Tony Rasmussen wrote that musical feature on Jerome Kern.